The Predator. The new smartphone was waiting for him in its multicoloured presentation box when he arrived home from work one Friday evening. It seemed like a supernatural reward for the dismal journey he had just undergone. It had taken the usual hour from the glass bubble of the call centre, with its perpetual cacophony of formidably calm and reasonable voices, through the industrial nowhere land of wind-blown detritus and urine-coloured swirls of oil under the streetlights, along the canal bank to the underground station, and finally the sardine tin journey filled with body odours, perfumes, and vacant eyes. His local station was practically under his flat, so that untethered objects vibrated slightly every 5 minutes, accompanied by a far-off thunder. He'd purchased the mobile from a website days ago and, in order to feel no debilitating expectation, had thrust the act deep into his mind to forget about it. This was a pathological reflex on his part. When a child, he had hated being let down by forgetful parents who, if they actually remembered his birthday, usually gave him something utterly inappropriate. The delight of buying for himself came with a job, regular income, and his little empire perched above the rumbling underground tracks. The artificially induced joy was wonderfully intensified when the object of his obsession arrived unexpectedly. It was as though someone loved him out there, a stranger, an anonymous stalker even. Nonetheless, the joy he experienced was genuine. He lifted the lid to reveal the brushed aluminium rectangle in a gauzy protective cover in its own fitted polystyrene compartment. Another section held the earphones, and a third the charger with its British and European plugs. Like eggs in a nest, he thought. Perfect. Slipping his fingers under the edge of the phone, he lifted it out and held it on the flat of his palm as though it had been placed there by a priest. The gauze slipped off as enticingly as a woman's net silk stocking, revealing the baby skin smooth cream casing and the dark rectangular screen. He allowed a finger to run lightly over its edge to locate the on-off switch. Then, by slanting it in the light, he saw the camouflaged, slightly recessed menu button. Soon he would be touching, massaging, pressing it, making functions come and go, lights appear, symbols, icons, scripts, images. His fingers would be making mesmeric gestures across the touchscreen, like a magician bringing information into existence and erasing it. The economy of the external controls was breathtakingly seductive. With a sigh at the need for deferred gratification, he fitted the charger and plugged it in on the bedside table under the lamp. Leave 8 hours before use. He ate a takeaway pizza and watched television. The meal made no mark on his consciousness. It was as though his perceptions wavered in mirages above an unmoving watermark, the image of his new mobile phone. He woke earlier than usual, before his working day alarm would normally have sounded, with the whispering siren of Lou Reed's own version of A Perfect Day. He'd muted it before sleep to allow the Saturday luxury of a lie-in. But excitement had ruled. His hand reached out and lifted the warm device, detaching the charger. Here it was, trembling with the potential to delight, to lead him into headlong adventures, to transcend the mundane ordinariness of his life. The sparse wooden furniture, the frayed polka-dot white on red curtains, and the beyond their wash-date bedsheets all faded as the luminosity of the touchscreen came to life. Despite knowing what he really wanted to do that morning, he performed the rituals that all new owners must undergo: installing date, time, country, language, and links to TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. He took photographs of his duvet-covered legs with bare feet sticking up at the end of the bed to check camera's functionality and ingrain in his mind the shortcut for its operation. Then he erased them. You can never tell when you might need to video an event which you could transfer instantly to the internet. He turned on his GPS location, and there he was, on a map, halfway along a radius between the city and the southern suburbs, a pulsating red dot. At the bottom of the screen was a pay-to-use link, a technology app that had captivated him since he'd seen it advertised on television. It was the reason why he had bought the smartphone in the first place. Before he left the bed, he had downloaded the app and paid up front to include a free first month's usage. A cursory glance showed that nothing was happening in his immediate area, not that where he lived would ever offer good hunting. It was not yet 7 o'clock, and so prospective prey would still be deep in their slumbers, having been out on the tiles until the early hours. He set the radius of contact at a half mile and went out without shaving to the supermarket to stock up on necessities, as well as a packet of celebratory crumpets and jam to give the day a special send-off. In the early evening, he would make final preparations for the hunt. In the meantime, as he checked products down the aisles, his mind wandered over his likely outfit for the chase and requisite body pampering. He thought he might wear his baggy grey cord suit with a new brilliant white cotton shirt, opened one button. He would polish his cream brogues first, then shower, shave, and trim his hair on the number 3 setting, short and acutely sculpted. He'd use his crystal chemical-free deodorant and the faintest touch of musky eau de cologne behind his ears. Given the miserable wet iron weather that was pressing down on London at the moment, he would wear his long parka with hood. As he finished his shopping trawl and collected his breakfast indulgence, he peeked at the screen on his new acquisition. Just staring at it fomented his blood. On the map of the area, little pinpricks were beginning to light up as potential companions switched on. There would be plenty of choice, no matter where he found himself, not that he had ever doubted it. When he'd finished breakfast, he would synchronize his various internet pages to the app, maybe tardily adding some cosmetic details about his interests and a couple of action photos from last summer's holiday surfboarding in Cornwall. He looked a dream, at least to his own mind, as he stepped out of the flat. A few stops on the tube took him to Embankment, where he began walking up towards the West End. He took a table in a promising-looking wine bar and switched on. A couple of taps of the screen, and he had a list of quarries twinkling in the immediate locale. There were 2 virtually next door, calling themselves Wildcat and Fatal. Their signals practically merged with his own. He pointed the phone at himself and took a selfie and sent the image to them with the text message, "Hello." A minute later, Fatal replied, "You look rather nice." Her image was what this investment was all about. Ash blonde hair in a bun and ruby red lips, regular features with clear skin, not over made up, not brassy, a slight hint of décolletage, smart coat with a fake fur collar, great silver hoops hanging from her ears, probably slightly older than him, but not so that it mattered. Years of disconsolation at his fate was gone at the touch of a button. A femme fatale, eh? You're an unblemished peach fatale, he typed. It was easier to fly on the wings of the written word than say such things face to face. Claude, I see you are a man of poetry. Her words appeared quickly, one after another. She seemed to be educated, judging by the extraordinary speed of her typing. Where are you now, sweet damsel? Le Petit Bistrot. He liked her words coming alive on his screen. I'm in the Vin Rouge, practically next door. Perhaps I could join you. Why don't you go to the bar and wait? He brushed off slight irritation at her injunction. There was too much going for her. Already his mind was travelling forwards, imagining intimacies, suppressing the possibility of a rebuff. She was seated as still as stone at a window table, creating much interest in passers-by. The barman had removed a reserve notice and placed her there for this sole purpose. Words unrolled on his screen. The bar, please. She didn't look his way, so he did as she commanded. She continued texting. Write me some more poetry. Well, this was good and bad. He was more fluent with text. On the other hand, he was as far away from examining her closely as he had been next door, unable to breathe in her perfume, watch the low lights cast shadows on her skin, sink into her eyes, and put his hand over hers, or test her domination. What'll it be? Asked the barman. Irish, rye, he replied, pumping himself up and starting to text back. Am I allowed to look at you as I write, for inspiration? Tell me what you see in poetry. A halo of platinum hair framing an exquisite profile. A graceful alabaster neck curved forward. Hands with long tapered fingers, one cupping the bowl of a wine glass as delicately as though it was a butterfly. And what am I thinking, poet Claude? This ratcheted up the difficulty. If he said what he really wanted to be in her mind, she might reject him out of hand, but he couldn't be anodyne and undersell the chemistry either. There had to be frisson. He'd set the standard. She now had expectations. I'm wondering about this man I have half invited into my life. Is it a temporary flirtation with fate, or will it have a delightful permanence? True. What else? He felt emboldened. He needs to prove to me that he is a poet, worthy of us moving from virtual to physical contact, from pixels to the perfection of being. Yes, accurate. And? What could he say? He was driving himself deeper into a paradox. The more successful his suggestions, the more her demands seemed to increase. It was classical prisoner's dilemma. He had to gain her trust for their relationship to burgeon. But if they stayed on this curiously attritional track, they would both lose out. How could he get her to see this? Unless, of course, she did see it and was playing him along in cruel amusement. He wrote, I am sitting in a bar, separated from a man by a game of my own creation. I am making the game as difficult as possible for him to see whether he has the qualities I seek, but it is a dilemma. If I demand too much, how could he or any man ever become my ideal other? If I ask too little, I will be plagued by his potential inferiority. So I must gauge his response to my challenge very judiciously. I must be pragmatic, remembering that the best a man can be is not perfection, but something organic, creating and ever expanding. The potential for growth must be my criterion above all others. Her words flashed back. Is that poetry or psychology? Claude wondered in a second's panic whether this was becoming too great a challenge. There were other faces winking at him from his screen, but a furtive scan showed none of their images remotely compared to hers. She was what had been unattainable all his life. She was beautiful, clever, witty. Was he going to give up the chase at the point when a single poetic metaphor might open the floodgates? No, he typed. Even though I am not looking at him, I can sense his mental torment. He is experiencing two conflicting nascent emotions, suffocation and abandonment. I have such control over him, he can barely breathe, but if he walks away from me, he will regret it for the rest of his days. He is desperate for a compromise. For me it is the same. If he cannot draw from his creative depths the words that will wash away all my doubts, then we will never come together. And I will also bear forever the regret of not knowing what might have been. He waited, staring at her back. Eventually, she typed, "So?" Claude Masson deliberated for several minutes. The bar was filling with well-heeled clients. It was not a place he could afford too often. His whiskey flickered with reflections of the ceiling lights as, in agitation, he tapped the bar's surface beside it. He looked across at Fatale. Her back was stiff and tense. She was looking out of the window, seemingly unconscious of being continually raked over by the eyes of hopeful, passing men. Finally he typed, "A beguiling snake in that perfect first garden offers an apple," and waited. It began raining as they walked, unspeaking, their shoulders occasionally bumping together. They had left when she texted a peremptory, "Let's go. Don't talk." Just as in the bar, her hair marked her out and drew passing attention. Claude, on the other hand, felt invisible, as though the light she cast about herself threw him into shade. He followed her out of the bubbling frisson of moneyed punters and into the on-off drizzle of the street. Neither carried an umbrella. Their faces became damp and then wet, droplets acting as micro-mirrors of the world they were passing through. Shops with flats above, a Methodist church, low-rise apartments, and then a narrow, cobbled alley of renovated yellow brick 18th century terraced labourers' cottages. She began texting beside him. "Wait while I open up and make the place tidy." He texted back, "Okay, Fatale," hoping by using her nickname he would make everything more personal. The little house looked charming, resolutely otherworldly in the brutal commercialized environment of the inner city. The doors painted a pleasing shade of pale yellow-grey lichen, the window frames white with dividers the same shade as the door, and an 18th century coach lamp, restored and electrified, was bolted to the wall above the lintel. Claude waited. The rain was heavier now, so he flattened himself for a little shelter in the doorway, finally heard a click and the door opened. in an ivory silk nightgown, a white feather boa around her neck, her naked body momentarily discernible when she lifted her hand to put a warning finger to her lips. She turned away, and he closed the door behind him. Spinet music hung in the air, almost inaudible. There was a faint musty scent of dried flowers. One round fat candle gave a yellow illumination to the room, casting sputtering light on the wallpaper, which was decorated with bold vegetation and crudely stylized animals and birds, like in a Gauguin painting. She seated herself on a sofa, covered by a throw of sparkling glass-beaded white brocade, and patted the space beside her. He took off his dripping parka and laid it on the doormat before joining her. She lifted up her face to his and whispered, "Time to eat the apple." He looked at her with complicit seriousness. Hers was the voice of voices. She slipped off the boa and circled his neck with it, making a loose knot at his throat. He smiled, liking the cool of it. She tightened it and pulled his mouth to hers. It grew tighter as her teeth bit into his upper lip. He found himself sinking into the oblivion of her icy, silk-encased body, floating on a windless sea of musk-scented darkness. The sharp pain of her greedy teeth and air-denying ligature receded ever further, until he lay in a final stillness beside her. The woman, who went by the pseudonym Fatale, sat up, her mouth a bloody gouge in her alabaster face. She opened a teeth-bared smile as she stroked his brow. At that moment, her mobile phone vibrated on the little table beside the sofa. From where she was sitting, she could see a red spot of light glimmering urgently on a map. It was within walking distance. Well, that was The Predator. If you like a touch of horror in your short stories, you'll find under the playlist title, Dark, a number of others. I hope you listen to them. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and maybe copy the link to your friends. If you like to read as well as listen, you can find novels, plays and short stories on my website, www.jacksanger.com. They're free to download, or you can make a donation. It's entirely up to you. So, in the meantime, go in peace. I'll be back soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.